Welcome back to the channel. Thanks for watching. Today we're going to be talking about three-story Secret History of the Giant Man. Some spoilers, pretty heavy spoilers about halfway through, so if you haven't read it, maybe watch halfway and then stop. But I'll be going through page by page and doing some commentary on this book. It's been a while. All right, welcome back to the channel. Sorry, it's been a while. Today we're going to be talking about three stories, so let's just dive right in. We'll start with the cover, which I did a few different versions of this. I'll try to dig them up. If I do, we'll flash them on the screen. Before we came up with this idea, really it was my wife Charlene's idea, also a designer and artist. And I was struggling with the cover design. I wasn't happy at all. And then she had an idea for a die cut. So I think I had done this cover, and then I was looking in, it was just like regular. And then she's like, do a die cut and have it when you open where he's looking inside. So this is 100% Charlene's idea, her concept. Anyway, one of my favorite covers just because of that. And it's great if you actually read the story. There's a sort of a double meaning with this cover. And so you can see how it sort of ties together. It's a three-dimensional object in a way, which is always how I approach designing covers. Is not just the art on the cover, but as a three-dimensional piece of work. The spine, the back cover, it all has to work together. So again, you can see that the perspective of the building sort of coincides with the spine, how that works together. Anyway, so that's the cover. Thanks, Charlene, for that. And then have the giant man inside. This is a story. And I always like to joke about how every cartoonist I know, when you have a kid, you do your book that really is about you dealing with being a parent and having a child. And I didn't realize at the time that this was going to be that book for me. I'm just kind of working on it, and then you just sort of realize later, oh yeah, this is what that's about. So this is that book for me. All right, so title page. Again, we just had fun with the design on this one, sort of leading into the story with some typography and some art. The whole premise of this book, it's split into three sections. So every section of the book is from a different character's point of view, the three women in the giant man's life. So the first book is from the point of view of his mother. The second chapter section is from the point of view of his wife. And then the third, final section is from the point of view of his daughter. That's the three stories. And there'll be spoilers in this. So if you haven't read this, spoilers more towards the end. I'll try not to spoil the ending, so you can watch sort of halfway through and then maybe stop if you haven't read it. But if you have read it, let's just keep going. A lot of this is based on my family history. It's based on my grandmother and my grandfather. My grandfather, who died in World War II, and his wife. There's a little bit of Louis Armstrong here, one of my favorites. A lot of this is taken directly from my family history. I sort of put a twist on it, and I sort of mashed some characters together. But in general, a lot of this is true. And let's see, we see them sort of meeting, and then we see the giant man's mom sort of alone, and then sort of her art career sort of forgotten in the background. See them getting married. A lot of this is just things that really happened. I won't go into too much of that. It's kind of personal. But then my grandfather, and then getting these different accounts. My dad did a lot of research on trying to figure out what happened to his dad in World War II, and sort of figuring out where he died and how he died. And so this is sort of a spin on kind of what he was trying to find out from those that were around him when he died. And so this isn't exactly what happened. I took some license with it. Then we sort of see him die in World War II, and the flower motif that we're going to kind of carry out throughout the book. as he dies in World War II, she's left alone, and then the reveal that the child in the background, she has a kid. So we see her raising as a single mom, finding somebody new. Cary Grant, I can't remember what still this is from. This is from, boy, it's been a while, but a Cary Grant movie. Maltese Falcon reference there too, one of my favorites. And we sort of see her getting older and seeing her kid slowly getting older, getting taller. A little bit of Edward Hopper influence here. You can sort of see the little nicks in the doorway as he grows taller and taller. And we establish the year. Again, the tablecloth with the flower motif, which I think we also sort of repeated in the cover. See him getting taller. The whole premise of the story is that this kid grows and he just keeps growing and growing and growing. The idea for the story actually came from like a second or third cousin of mine who was a detective, and he, in high school, was the tallest kid in the class, and they found a tumor, which is where all of this came from. They found a tumor that was stimulating his pituitary gland and making him grow and grow and grow. They were able to cut that tumor out, and then he stopped growing, but not before he'd gotten kind of really tall. But it saved his life. But I remember meeting him and finding out his story, and on the drive home from meeting him, I had the idea for this book. And the idea of basically what if he hadn't stopped growing. So we get some newspaper clippings as he grows taller and taller. Him being a girl, sort of the mom sort of being left alone again. Him falling in love, going to school, going to college, his mom left alone. This image here with the shoes was something that my mom had mentioned to me one time. She said that there's a kind of sadness from seeing a person's shoes. You know, the idea, because their shoes are so present in them, and the idea of just seeing them empty, but also formed to their feet, like they have a presence. You know, if you know the person, you see their shoes, and seeing them empty, there's a sadness to that, which my mom told me that one time and just always really stuck with me. Here we go. We see some of her, these old drawings that Giant Man did as a kid. When I had my niece, who was at the same age as he was in the book, I had her draw these. Because it's kind of hard to fake kid drawing as an adult. You just can't do it. So these are the legitimate kid drawings. Now we're throwing the art away. All right, then we sort of follow the Giant Man as he goes to college and leaves the mother behind. And we sort of see her life after sort of becoming disconnected. And talking to her mother, having these memories. This image was actually taken from an old photo I found at an estate sale. I used to go to a lot of estate sales and just buy up old negatives and then make prints off these old negatives. It was just a lot of great old vintage photos. And that was one of them. See the flower motif reappear here. It's sort of a trigger for her memory with the death of her husband and the flowers he left. Again, repeated, and now the flowers are in the hospital. And then she's dying, sort of parallel, him continuing on as she fades away. Sad. This is a sad one. I wrote this book for my wife, for Charlene, because she hadn't been reading a lot of comics, and I realized there weren't a lot of comic books that were written with someone like her in mind, her tastes, you know, which is more fiction and more something more weighty and emotional, and just with character, less action, fighting, and everything. So I wrote this book with the idea that for her, in hopes that she would like it and would convince her to read more comic books, which it ended up working. It's her favorite book of mine that I've done. And then here's the letter. We see that from her husband, based a lot on the real letter that my grandfather left my grandmother. That's the first story. All right, second story. Now we're following. We're in Chicago, and a lot of this is based on some of my own mom's experiences working in the boat on the Great Lakes. And then this is a guy she met, inspired by David Rashi, who's a guy that my mom actually met when I was friends with in school. If you don't know who that is, look up Sledgehammer, a great TV show from the 80s, like a comedy detective show. He's also in the new series Succession on HBO. Anyway, based on him. This isn't my dad. Here's a memory that she has of her grandfather pulling a splinter out of her hand, which was a memory that my wife had of her grandfather pulling a splinter out of her hand. It's kind of a nice image, a mix of sort of like caring for, but also causing pain. So that sort of fit with the story. And really a lot of writing, what it's about is just listening to other people's stories and experiences and trying to sort of take those and assemble them into something, into a narrative that can make something new. And this is where we see the wife of the giant man starting to build her first miniatures. And then the parallels here with her building miniatures and sort of expressing how she feels in relation to him, so maybe trying to come to grips with that or control it. I don't want to explain it too much. I don't want to ruin the mystery of this story. Again, I've repeated this in a couple other books, but sort of like that quiet singing of a rope against a flagpole or on a ship mast. I just like that lonely kind of sound. Again here, this is with first time in comics where I try to do basically a rack focus, where you're focused on the raindrops here, and then you shift where the raindrops become blurry and she is focusing past it, so you're seeing the focus from her point of view. That was something I've sort of figured out I hadn't done before in comics. I was excited about that. It's a small technical thing. Again, this is all ink and watercolor, and I was working in tiers here, so if you look at the entire book, it's 3 levels stacked. And I was working the same way I'd worked on Super Spy, which I'll do another video on. But this is where I was doing, the pages were like horizontal pages that I would split into panels, but I would stack them in 3s when I scanned them and put them together into a book. Here we see them going to college. Sort of see an imagination as she's imagining what it's like. Again, this is the thing I repeat later in Department H on issue 1. A different way of using it, but it's a similar idea of sort of slipping in some subliminal panels here. Something that I think comics is good at. And then I'm playing with format here and having fun with the design. So this is like a souvenir book of the giant man, Turtle Race, which is how my parents actually met. And then a little bit of back history too about their nerve endings, inspired by the giant of Illinois, a real person, one of the tallest people to ever live. We see her building miniatures based on their real experiences. She's recreating those, going to the museum or going to the drive-in theater. Citizen Kane reference. As they sit in the back of the pickup. Getting to know each other, getting married, an art show. I had this idea of what kind of art could he do as a giant man. He could just do a giant handprint. It's something that nobody else can do. So I like that idea of him sort of using that to create art. Because what kind of job could he have at this point? Then we go to the Smithsonian and we see all of his stuff. We sort of flash forward a little bit to his shoes and how the Smithsonian's putting those on display for everybody just to see. And then this sequence here, this little phone she had, and the way it gets shocked we had this phone when I was a kid. We had like a replica old-fashioned phone, and when you would pick it up, sometimes it would just shock you. There was like a short circuit in the thing, and when you pick it up when it rang, it would shock you. So it's kind of a funny real thing I put in there. Again, I was trying to figure out how would the giant man make money. Like, how do you make a living as a giant man? Sell advertisements or be a spokesman. So he was a spokesman for his fake cigarettes. So I just put the actual ad in the book. Kind of had fun with that. Using blueprints here as they designed their house. And then another section here where they're the blueprints of the house that he built for them to live in. It's also kind of showing them walking through the house, sort of having an argument, and it sort of shows them sort of growing apart. So we see them. She's building miniatures as he's growing up. He's growing taller. They're growing further apart. More ads. These are all based on like vintage ads I found. Then we see the CIA. Of course, they have to have spies in something. So this is probably the most me thing in this book that I stuck in there, which is the CIA recruiting him to sort of be a courier. Flashbacks, they're trying to figure out what's wrong with him, if they can cure him. This is a page, again, sort of inspired by the cover of Super Spy, which I'll talk about later, but the idea of using the transparency of the pages to sort of show an x-ray. So if you actually hold this up to the light, I don't know if I can do it on camera. But you can sort of see the x-ray through the page. And the idea there is you could hold it up and you could see a perfect x-ray of what they're looking at. This is all real. This is what really happened to my relative. They're trying to figure out, this sequence is based on one of my favorite children's books I had as a kid called Giant John. We bought it from the library. They were getting rid of it. And I sort of did the art style, and the art all kind of looked like the art from that book. But it's this giant who's friends with all these little fairies, and he builds a castle and then accidentally messes up the castle and scares all the fairies away. And has to try to fix it. Anyway, I thought it would be fun to sort of mimic the style of that, to sort of tell that section of the story. Again, just having the fun with a format of comic books. I'm trying to figure out, every book I do, I'm just trying to figure out what to do that I can only do in comics. It's something that can't be done in another medium. All right. More relationship stuff. He's becoming a spy and they're growing apart. He's growing out of his clothes. It was really hard to get the scale. I really wanted to show the scale of him versus her. And then as he gets bigger and bigger, just showing him more disconnected. And I'm just trying to figure out interesting ways to do that. But I always like this idea of him really tall and just these birds sort of like circling around him. Here he is on a boat. That's the only way he can travel anymore, is by boat. And there's some emotional moments. I won't go into all of it. I don't want to spoil it. But here's a little side story where we see how the spy courier puts a little thing in his ear, the secret message. Similar to how Billie Holiday, Josephine Baker, Houdini, historically, they all were spies in one way or another, if you look it up. I was kind of inspired by that, using him as sort of a spy courier. And him being so famous, people wouldn't figure it out. Also, I had to figure out how his clothes worked. That was an interesting thing to try to figure out. Him marching in the parade, in the Thanksgiving parade, I thought it'd be funny and cool. This is my car. I used to have a 59 T-Bird, so that's that. Him getting sick, passing out during the parade. We're not quite in spoiler territory yet, but this is them sort of falling apart, her imagining their horrible ending, and then sort of drifting apart. This is the first book where I had multiple readings or interpretations of the book. And so I won't really say what the book is about because I've had people tell me what the giant represents. And that none of those interpretations are wrong. I had my own interpretation of what it was. But it was interesting how the giant sort of became something different for everyone that read it, which is interesting to me. I had an intention, and then some people take it that way, and some people don't. They take it another way that I like just as much. So we see him growing apart. See his scales. He goes bigger, and he starts to be more distant. And eventually, they can't hear each other. And then we use the chalkboard to communicate, which I end up using for as captions. And this is where, if you haven't read it, maybe you want to stop here and then read it, because there might be some spoilers ahead. Anyway, they have a child, and then he decides he ends up leaving, leaves their message. And then he's just going to go taller and taller. He knows he's dying, so he just wants to go off and die, basically. So then the third story is from the point of view of his daughter, older, and now trying to figure out what happened to him. So she's traveling the world trying to figure out what happened to him, listening to stories, these sort of urban legends about what he did and where he went, and all these different sightings, sort of like Bigfoot sightings. She interviews people, tries to figure it out. And then she's trying to figure out what's true and what's not. She finally tracks it down. And then this is playing again with the format. It's the souvenir book that we saw pieces of earlier. There's the cover of it, and then we sort of see the real story behind the souvenir, sort of polished official version of his life and what he did. Vietnam. That may or may not be an homage to Watchmen. Let's see him. This is a funny joke to me. If you're the age I am, you remember the honeycomb commercials. Honeycomb's big. Yeah. They're not small. It's my giant man joke. We see him visiting different locations, and see what his footprints end up making small lakes. As she tracks his progress, and we see the marks he's made in rivers and on mountains, and then finally to the ocean. She dives down and she finds his final resting place, which is when I pitched this book. This was the ending. I had the beginning and some of the stuff in the middle, and I had the end. And this is one of the things I drew to sort of pitch the book to sell Dark Horse on it when I first pitched them on it. But I just had that image of these big bones in the bottom of the ocean. So then we see these miniatures reappear, another theme of the miniatures telling the story. And then a book being written by his daughter, Secret History of the Giant Man. And then the end. Okay, this is a picture of me from a while ago, 2009, in that 59 T-Bird I used to have. That's it. And then end papers. And then the back. That's Giant Man. Hope you like that. Hope I didn't spoil it too much. Hope I didn't explain too much. Thank you.